Well, and think about the personal risk too. Because if there's somebody out there who simply needs Austin gone, but they're not that passionate about the anger part of it, it's more of just a very cold, calculating chess piece on their board that they need to move, then there are cleaner, easier, and more personally removed ways for them to get rid of him. But this is different than that. This is no, I want to go into this person's house. I want to go into the place where they feel the most safe and the happiest. I want to go right in there and show him that happiness doesn't exist as long as I have a say in it, and I'm going to kill them up close and personal.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. I'm Miles Reef. I'm here as always with my buddy Sean Cahill. This is the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. Unsolved homicides, missing persons cases, stories without an ending. Guys, before we get into it today, because of the nature of this case, I just want to read a little disclaimer before we get started. Before we begin, we want to be clear this episode discusses an ongoing homicide investigation. Everything presented here is based on publicly available information. We are not accusing any individual of a crime. No one mentioned in this episode has been charged unless we explicitly state otherwise. In homicide investigations, law enforcement routinely examines family members, friends, and associates. That does not imply guilt. Our goal here is to present facts responsibly, explore investigative questions, and encourage lawful tips to authorities. Now, you know that we're getting into something good if I'm reading a disclaimer like that up top, right, Sean? So you want to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a very interesting and very current story, and all the people involved are still around, obviously, except for the person that it kind of centers around, which is a homicide victim named Austin Kanuch. Miles is going to tell us a little bit more about him in a moment, but I wanted to say this case actually came to us organically because it was sent to us by Bob and Rosemary Nelly, who are Liz Barraz's parents. They do a lot of work with Crime Stoppers and with a group called Parents of Murdered Children. And through their work in these organizations, they've met a lot of other families who are struggling to get answers in their unsolved cases. One of these families is Austin Kanuch's family. And so they referred us to Harold and Celine Miller, who we talked to and who were very eager to have our channels help sort of getting the word out about Austin's unsolved murder and trying to get tips and information from the public so that they can close the door on this really, really awful tragedy. There's a lot to this case, Miles. So I think we're going to just take it like we normally do, step by step in these case breakdowns and introduce you to who Austin was, what was going on in his life, the various people involved. And then from there, we'll sort of explore where some answers could possibly lay if we found more information, how the public can help, and where the investigation seems to sit today. So, Miles, do you want to kick it off and just introduce Austin to the audience for us?
Absolutely. So Austin was 39 years old. He lived in Houston, Texas. He was at the time of his death, he was married to a woman named Mary. They had one child together. They had a son. He had been divorced from his ex-wife Kristen for some time. He actually had two adolescent daughters with his first wife Kristen. Austin actually had custody of those girls, but they did at some point spend time with their mother.
Yeah, and let me explain that a little bit, if I can, very quickly. So, in Texas, the way that this situation can work is sometimes in a custody dispute, one parent is awarded what's called primary custody, right? And that's what Austin had. So, he has primary custody, meaning the girls primarily live with him. They go to school in his school district. He makes a lot of the decisions for what goes on in their life, but it doesn't mean they never see their mom. They do see their mom. It's just that it's not a 50-50 split, right? Where 50% of the time they're with her and 50% of the time with him, and they have to, coordinate on every single decision. Austin was kind of giving like primary caregiver status, and Kristen stayed in the picture just in a different capacity. So it sounds like semantics, and it probably is, but Austin did not have full custody. He was the primary custody parent in that situation. Anyway, as a job, he was very successful. He was a luxury car salesman, and by all counts, a very good one. People loved him. He had a big personality. Everybody we talked to about Austin mentioned what a big, lovable personality he was. He's not the kind of guy who melts into the background. He walks in the room and you know it. And Austin's career success translated into a lot of stability. This is a guy who didn't live a crazy out there lifestyle, right, Miles? I mean, from what we've heard, he was pretty stable, pretty even keeled.
from everyone that we've spoken to and interviews that we've conducted and the research that we've done, Austin was an extremely stable guy. He was extremely family oriented. When he got with Mary, everybody said that it was just, the perfect thing for him and that he was extremely motivated and happy to have, a new start, to have the opportunity to have more kids and everything else. Now, interesting point is that the day before the murder happened, Austin and his wife had just closed on a new house. At the time that he was killed, they were actually living in a rental home that they had been in for quite some time. But they had just gotten everything together and they had just closed on this new home. So they were, by all accounts, extremely excited to move in. They were getting ready to do that, and it was literally the day that they closed on the house, it was that night, the morning of the next day, when Austin was murdered in his home. So take from that what you will, but it is an interesting piece of information. Now, from everyone that we've spoken to and from everything that we can find from police reports and everything associated with the investigation, it doesn't seem like Austin had any red flags in his life. There was no financial impropriety. He was in good standing at his job. There were no affairs that were uncovered. There was nothing, strange going on in his bank accounts or anything else. I mean, this is a guy who was literally living the American dream, and he was just really coming into his own. I mean, he was 39. He just started a new family, had a 1-year-old kid. His wife Mary had taken on the two daughters from his previous marriage. It was, they were living in, they were all going to live together in this new home. So he was really living the American dream. He had a great job. He was loved by everyone at his job. He excelled there. He had a bright future. So yeah, that's kind of who Austin was in a nutshell, and that's where he was at in his life on the night that he got murdered.
Yeah, I think you said it. When I look at Austin, I do think this guy is living everybody's dream, right? Yes, there had been a previous marriage. Yes, there was a blended family, which has growing pains of its own. He has adolescent girls living with a new wife, and there's a baby in the house. I'm sure not every day was perfect, right? I'm sure not every moment of his life was filled with joy. We all have our challenges, but overall, this is the trajectory most of us would choose for ourselves, right? Family around us, people that love us, moving into a new house, a job that we thrive at, that we succeed in. He's also a church-going guy. Everybody at his church had a lot of good things to say about him. And so this is just a person who you would think that guy's got it made. But then around 4 in the morning, one night, he winds up getting murdered in his own home. So let's walk through what we know about that night because the investigators have not released every single piece of information. But Mary, who was with Austin in bed when he was killed, does have her story to tell and does have a memory of what she saw and heard and experienced that night, which is the best thing we have to go on. And there's a little bit more evidence we'll talk about later, but for now, let's stick to that. So basically, Austin and Mary and their 1-year-old son were the only people at home that night. His two teenage girls spent the night at his ex-wife Kristen's house, which was nearby, but they were the only three in the house when this took place. So uh, sometime around 4:15, 4:20-ish in the morning, Mary wakes up because Austin is waking her up and it's pitch black in their room. She doesn't know what's going on, and he's asking her to turn on a light. Mary fumbles around for the lamp. She finally, finds the switch and turns it on, and what she sees is Austin covered in blood and their bed sheets soaked in blood. Austin doesn't know what's happened. He was sleeping before whatever took place, but they're the only two people in the rooms. In other words, whoever attacked him is no longer there. Austin is kind of, obviously confused and freaking out. He says, call 911, which Mary does immediately. And then from the account that we've heard, the 911 dispatcher is trying to figure out what's the emergency, what's going on, you guys. But Austin and Mary are both really confused because they were just in a dead sleep a minute ago and now they're awake and there's blood everywhere. They start asking, okay, your husband's been hurt. How old is he? And at that point, Austin utters his last words to Mary, which he's trying to help her answer the question. He says, 39 years old. And then he loses consciousness. So a short time later, first responders arrive. The police are there. Paramedics are there. They take Mary and her son out of the house. And as Mary is sitting in the driveway talking to police, she notices at some point that homicide detectives arrive outside the house. And it now becomes obvious to her Austin has been killed. He is dead. And this is no longer just a strange assault from possibly a burglar. There's a murder that's taken place.
Right. Now, here's let's walk through the scene and let's talk about some of the things that really matter, right? There were laptops, phones, all kinds of stuff just laying out in the living room. Nothing was touched. And I think it's really important to emphasize this because literally they could have grabbed stuff while they were running out of the house that was just sitting there and they didn't. So there was like not only was it obviously they went to the bedroom, they murdered Austin, this person, but they didn't even take an opportunistic chance to grab something while they were leaving. So I guess what I'm saying is not only was it not like a break-in where they were like tiptoeing around and pulling stuff out while a couple slept, they walked in, killed Austin, and walked out. They did not grab anything. So there's no sign of any kind of robbery whatsoever on the premises, right? So I think that's really, really important. The other thing is that the attack solely focused on Austin, okay? Mary was right in the bed next to him. Austin, we know, was killed while he was laying in the bed. Obviously, as Sean just said, he wakes her up. He's bleeding to death. She calls 911. So she's right there. They don't do anything to her. They only attack Austin. Also, so the 1-year-old child is also in the house, sleeping in a separate room. They are also left unharmed. That's Austin and Mary's son, right? Austin and Mary's son is not touched. Mary is not touched. Austin is. So I take from that it's targeted, right? They broke into that house to get Austin. They did not steal anything. So it really appears to be a focused attack on Austin with no other motive. One thing that I also want to touch on right now, which is probably obvious, but it needs to be said, is that his two daughters from his previous marriage were not present that night in the home. And even though Austin did have custody of those girls, they were at their mother's house. I think it's just really, really important to emphasize this does not look like a robbery, and it does look like a targeted murder against one person, okay? Because there are other people in the house, they're all left alone, and nothing is touched. Let's get a little bit more into just breaking down what we know about the scene, right? So the attack occurred inside the bedroom. That means the perp entered the house, found their way to the bedroom, was looking for Austin, right? Baby unharmed, wife unharmed.
Exactly. And of interest is the fact that it was a forced entry. This information was eventually released by the Harris County Sheriff's Department investigators. So whoever got in there did it either by picking a lock or breaking a window. I don't know exactly what method of forced entry, but it does, let us know that they didn't have a key. Somebody didn't leave a door open. The house was broken into. And the investigators working on this case have kept it, I mean, pretty tight-lipped, right? They have never named a person of interest. No one's ever been arrested. There's nobody that they've publicly said they're working on.
That's part of why we read the disclaimer up top. And you'll see as we get into the interviews that we've conducted on this, everyone's being very, very careful because nobody wants to jeopardize the investigation. So I think we need to be very clear that like not a lot of information has been released. Now, 2 years after the murder in 2025, the police did release a video that was recorded on a neighbor's security camera. Okay. Now, what this video showed was an individual on a bicycle arriving at Austin's house at about 3:26 in the morning and then leaving again at 4:24. Okay. So they're in the house about an hour. The police do believe that this is the individual who killed Austin, and that's why they released the video to see if anybody had any information about it.
Now, when the Harris County Sheriff's deputies released this video, they sort of described the person that they see in it as post-adolescent. Now, that's an interesting phrase. It's hard not to notice, right? I've also seen people talking about this, describe it as they said post-pubescent, but I think what they really said was post-adolescent. Either way, it's driving at the same thing, right? It's somebody who maybe is a teenager, a little on the older end, not quite an adult, but possibly somebody in their early 20s, late teens. It seems like that's sort of what they're driving at here.
I think it was Austin's brother-in-law, who you'll see we have a great interview with him. I think he actually said it was an interesting word choice. Take from that what you will, but it's something to think about in a case that doesn't give us that much to chew on, right? So as Sean mentioned up top, the way that we actually connected with Austin's family was through Bob and Rosemary Nelly, who actually are super active with Crime Stoppers. So Crime Stoppers was obviously involved in this case. Now they offered a $20,000 reward initially, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas came in and he doubled that. So the reward actually went up to 40 grand. So right now there is $40,000 sitting in an account. And if somebody makes an anonymous tip and that leads to an actual arrest and a conviction in this case, that 40 grand belongs to them. So I think that's also important to mention. Obviously, at the end, we'll put up all the relevant links like we always do. And if anybody does have a tip, all the information will be there. So, Sean, why don't we talk about what we know versus what we don't know in this case?
Yeah, I think that so much of it is about what we know versus what we don't know. And I can already tell just based on my experience, making this show with you that we have another case here with a person on video and we can't exactly tell if it's a man or a woman or what they're wearing. And I think that this is the kind of thing that our audience really likes to dissect. Now, when I look at this video, which we can put up, I see, I guess, either a slender young teen and it looks like maybe a female. It could be an adult female. It's hard to say, but the person is slight. They don't appear to be very big on that bike. So I guess I kind of understand what the detective is driving at. It's definitely, I would rule out any 280 pound, 6'2" male from being the person on this bike. We're probably looking for somebody smaller and slighter.
Yeah.
Beyond that,
And
though,
listen, to be fair, there's people of large sizes in every gender, right? But I agree with you that it is a slight
it could
build
be no, it
on
could
this
be a
person.
male for sure. I think that just looking at the sort of figure, which is a little bit blurry, it does appear to be a little bit feminine to me, just from what I can see. Maybe that's my own implicit bias, sort of the Rorschach test of when I first look at this, what's the first thing that comes to mind? But I'm certainly not ruling out just a young, thin male too. It could absolutely be that. So what do
Post-pubescent.
Post-pubescent, and that might be this very conversation we're having right now, may be why they landed on that word. It's hard to describe this definitively. So let's talk about what we really know. This is targeted violence against one person inside of their home, right? Like you said, nothing was taken. I think that's really important, and you said it too. The fact that this individual found their way after spending an hour either right outside of Austin's house or part of that hour inside, they spent an hour there doing something, and they took nothing except for Austin's life. So were they looking around the house for Austin that whole time? Were they waiting for a particular person to fall asleep or a neighbor to stop smoking on their back porch and go inside? Who knows? I think the hour spent in that area is one of the we don't knows that's really odd. The next thing is why wasn't Mary hurt? I think we're going to talk about Mary and her role as a possible person of interest from the police point of view later. But it is interesting to note just for this part of the conversation that in that bedroom there were two people in bed, and it would have been really easy for somebody to say, "Let's not leave a witness alive. I'm going to, kill this person too." But they didn't. It really makes you think this was probably just about Austin. And they knew exactly what they were going to do and how quickly they were going to do it and how quickly they could vanish. Because, like we said, when Mary woke up, and they turned on the light, no one was there but her and Austin. So whoever did it fast and left. I find that to be really interesting. It also makes me wonder, had that person been in that home before? Were they comfortable in the dark, getting out quickly, knowing exactly where to turn in the hallway and what door to get out from? It definitely leaves a lot to the imagination to figure out, what sort of a person would be capable of that.
Right.
Um,
And that also connects with the, lack of information about how they entered the home. Possibly
exactly.
from a
Exactly.
theoretical standpoint.
Exactly. No, that's why I think it's so interesting. I think those two pieces of information together might tell us quite a bit about a possible, suspect profile. Like you said, no robbery, but also no suspect named, right? There's been nobody publicly arrested, nobody brought in over and over for questioning, like you see in some of these big public cases where the news is like, man, they're bringing in, Tom Gifford for the fifth round of questioning. That hasn't happened here. And if it has happened, we don't know about it. It's possible that there have been behind the scenes interviews with the same people over and over, but the police don't always, make a press release about that kind of information. So from where we're sitting, we don't know that. So the other things that I think are interesting here are we don't know what weapon was used and also if there's any DNA evidence left behind. A lot of times, if I'm picturing Austin being stabbed or bludgeoned in his bed, that's really violent. And somebody could easily accidentally cut themselves while doing that and leave a drop of their own blood or accidentally get their hair caught in, a lamp that's falling over. Like that's a very violent act. And it's the kind of murder that typically does leave both people's DNA at the scene, or very often does anyway. So we don't know if anything's been left behind. That might be something that the investigators do have and are keeping in their back pocket until they have the right suspect and can, match that. And so then the final thing to me that I think is interesting that we do know is that the person arrived on a bicycle, right, in the middle of the night. What we don't know is why. How far away are they coming from? Did they park a van up the street, get the bike out of it and ride there? And if so, why? Just to throw off investigators? Or did this person actually live close enough that they could take a middle of the night bike ride, commit a murder, and ride their bike back to their actual house? That will become interesting later as we start looking a little deeper into this, but I want to put that in the viewer's mind for now. It's an odd choice, right? You don't see a lot of bicycle related murders in a place as big and sprawling as Houston. Like that's a very big spread out city. So it makes me think something must be going on with that, right?
It's the kind, we're talking about like subdivisions, kind of track home kind of areas, and it's not the kind of city where people are biking, long distances, right? It's like if you're biking, you're kind of like within areas, within neighborhoods. And it's a freeway city, right? So I think that is an important point
Yeah,
to
if
make.
this was like Amsterdam or something, I don't think the bike would
Yeah,
mean much. But in Houston, it's very odd.
yeah, I totally agree. So I don't think that this is a case where Sean and I are going to do a separate video about suspects and theories because honestly, there's just not that many. It's such a mystery, and Austin had such a clean life, and there's just nothing out there that can really be grasped onto. So I just kind of want to walk through on this video what the main theories are, and they're pretty generic, but I think they do fit this case. And that, any chatter about this case online, these are certainly the theories that have been thrown about, whether they've been, which one's been elevated or not, we can kind of get into that. But so let's look at the first option, right? It's a random intruder. Okay. Now, crime did happen at night. Houston is a big city. It's a high crime city, it's a big metropolitan city. But that's kind of it. That's all we have going for that. It happened at night and it's a big place with lots of violence. What's going against that is nothing is stolen. They go into the bedroom, they specifically target Austin, and there's nothing else that's done to the house from what we understand. And, as we've said, the police have kept a really tight grip on all the information about this case, but we have interviewed family members, and you guys will see those videos in the coming weeks. The house was untouched. So, we have interviewed people that went back to the crime scene that night. And well, I should say that afternoon, after it had happened and later in the day. But nothing was touched. The house wasn't ransacked. It didn't, there was nothing violent. The only violence was the blood that was, the trail of blood that Austin's body had left when they had to take his body out of the house, right? And what had happened in the bedroom. Other than that, nothing had happened. So the idea of a random intruder, you think like kids breaking in just to make a mess, people coming in to rob, whatever that might look like, perhaps even darker things happening. But again, Mary's left untouched. There's a baby that sleeps through it in another room, and Austin is just targeted in his bed. So, random intruder to me, it doesn't seem likely. It just doesn't. Um, so what's the next most logical thing that we would look at, right, in a case like this? So that it's someone that Austin knows, right? I mean, as we all know, people who watch this channel, people who follow true crime, most of the time when there's a murder of this type, it's a personal. It's someone that knows this person. It's someone that has a personal grudge, it's usually financial, or there's some sort of jealousy thing. There's something going on, right? So we have to kind of look at that. And again, we're not accusing anyone, but we kind of have to look at who is in Austin's life, who we know of, and what the possible motivations may have been with anybody who's around him, right?
Yeah, it's the classic detective's first question is who benefited from this crime, right? Who benefited from this person being murdered? If the motive wasn't obviously robbery, or like you said, Austin didn't stumble upon a burglar in his home. He was asleep in his own bed. So we can't use that one here. It doesn't make sense. And, of course, there's always the outside theory that maybe this was a crazed, person who's a serial killer doing this for fun. Well, it hasn't happened in this way since that we know of, and it doesn't seem to fit into a pattern in that area of anyone else doing it. So I think for now we can table that until a serial pattern emerges. And you're right, we would look at now the people closest to Austin. And as we know, the first place we always go is somebody's spouse. There's nobody closer to you than your spouse. So, unfortunately, Mary, having lived through the attack on her husband, did get brought in for a long, long interview that morning, and probably, I would guess, more interviews after that, after she had gotten rest and detectives had more questions and wanted to come back to her again and again. The obvious thing here is, was their life insurance policy? Was one of them having an affair? Was it something like Mary had a partner she wanted to get with and she wanted Austin out of the way so she could get that new house and all the insurance money and go off and start a new life? Unfortunately, people do have these comments on the internet before more information is available. And I think Mary was subjected to a lot of speculation like that. But here's something that I want to be really clear about. Mary has been publicly declared cleared by the investigators in this crime. And so, even though that's always the first person we always go to, the more they looked at Mary, the more they realized that she was just another victim in this whole scenario. I mean, she is a widow. Her newborn son now does not have his father. And her life has been basically upended in the most traumatic way you can imagine. I mean, being in bed when your spouse is murdered and you're about to move the next day and you have a 1 year old. I can't imagine much that would really mess up your life more than that. And so Mary has not benefited in any way to answer that first question, who benefited. It's been quite the opposite. There's no benefit to her at all. It's been a huge tragedy in her life. But what about the other parts of Austin's life? I mean, he was a guy who had a lot of friends at church. He had friends outside of church, just social circles. And then, of course, his place of business, right? Investigators looked in all those places, trying to find a conflict. Was he in debt to somebody? Had he maybe had an affair with somebody's wife? Or was there some other kind of conflict, right? And they just couldn't find anything. I mean, Austin was a guy with a great reputation who lived up to it every day. He was outgoing, friendly, trustworthy, honest. He's the kind of car salesman. People would come back to him and buy a second car years after they bought the first because they had a good experience with him. And I think that says a lot. You know how much it means for you to want to go back and deal with him again. But Austin was that kind of a guy. He had that kind of integrity in his life. And so it was really baffling for the investigators to keep digging and trying to find somebody that had a problem with him and coming up with nothing. Now, I want to be clear, as we're talking about all these people, no one here has been charged with anything, and nobody is, you know, we're not saying anybody is guilty of this crime. We're just going down the list of people that we know for a fact the investigators have looked at. And now that's going to bring us to a third person who I'm just going to admit to you now has a little bit more of an intriguing um, list of entanglements with Austin here. And that is his ex-wife, right? Which automatically tells you right there, this was not a perfect relationship in Austin's life. It would be impossible to say that it was, or there would have been no divorce. Looking a little closer at the ex-wife, Kristen. So that night, we've already mentioned the two daughters that she shared with Austin were at her house. The next thing is why did Austin have custody of those girls to begin with? We looked a little bit deeper into that, and it seems like, from what we can tell, it was a little bit of a contentious divorce. There was a custody battle in court. The interesting thing here about that custody issue is that after Austin's death, the custody of those two girls did revert to Kristen. Now, I'm not saying that that means anything. And again, I want to be clear that that doesn't indicate anybody's guilty of anything. But as we're looking through Austin's life and we're looking for things that changed for people around him after his murder, that is one thing that changed, right? That is something that definitively was one way when he was alive and it was another way when he was dead. Now, as far as the bicycle thing, right? I want to return to that while we're talking about this person. We had wondered ourselves as we were looking at this story, did any of the people that we've talked about so far live within biking distance of Austin? And now I don't know every single person that he worked with and every single person from his church, and where they might live. So it's entirely possible that one of those people could live nearby too. But we did notice that Kristen lived pretty close. We'll put up a map here. And in fact, it's worth noting that the last camera in the area to catch the figure on the bicycle saw it turning into the neighborhood where she was living at the time. Again, want to be super clear, that doesn't indicate guilt. There's a lot of coincidences when you look into murders and you start going down the list of suspects. These are all people who knew each other. They all lived around each other, so it could mean nothing. But if we're just sort of collecting data points, that is another data point, right? There could also still be other sorts of outside conflicts that we don't know about, right?
Right. And there always are, right? And I think, as I stated earlier, you never know everything that's going on in a person's life. There's also always the case that there's kind of something random happen, right? Like there might be something that, Austin had an interaction with someone that, from his point of view and from everyone around his point of view, it was normal, but for that person, it wasn't, right? And that set that person off. It's always a possibility. It does happen. So could something have happened at his workplace? Could someone have been unhappy with the deal that he made? Could there have been like a jealous coworker because Austin was so good at his job? Could there have been a boss that didn't like him that thought like, oh, eventually this guy's going to take my spot? Sure. Any of those things are possible, right? Could there have been someone at his church that he had some sort of dispute with that we're not sure of? Could there have been some sort of road rage incident that Austin wasn't even aware that he had made somebody that angry? 100%. Could there have been a financial motive that we don't know about? Possibly. Nothing's been uncovered by the police. I will say the only financial thing that's been uncovered that's actually happened because of Austin dying is that survivor benefits went to both of his spouses. So, in other words, survivor benefits went to Mary and survivor benefits went to his ex-wife, Kristen. So, other than that, though, there's been no financial impropriety discovered, and there's no debts, nothing like that. So it doesn't seem on the surface, and from what we know and from what the police have released, like there was a financial motivation for this murder. So just to sum it up, I think it's safe to sort of say that I think it's safe to say that it was not an opportunistic killing. This was not a robbery. This was a targeted act of focused violence in a very intimate setting in a man's bedroom that left a person alive right next to him and him dead, right? With extremely limited collateral damage, we could say in that case, right? So not opportunistic, not motivated by robbery, extremely targeted. We don't know specifically the weapon that was used on Austin, but we do know that he was stabbed to death. We do know that he was bleeding out and that he had physical puncture wounds on his body, right? And that there was a trail of blood when his body was taken out of the home. So this is a very up close and personal way to kill somebody
And
in his
angry,
bed.
right? I mean, like we know this.
100%.
It takes a lot to stab somebody to death. You see it in movies,
Yeah.
and it's like whatever, Tom Cruise will stab 100 guys in the course of a Mission Impossible movie, but in real life, you see interviews with people who have actually had to stab somebody, and it's extremely traumatic. It is up close, it is personal, and it is also more violent and difficult than I think you're able to know until you've even, until you've gone
Right.
through it yourself. So what does it take to do that to the point of killing somebody? It's not cold and calculated, Miles. I mean, it might be cold and
Right.
calculated for you to get to the room, to the place where you can do it. But once you're there and you do that, that's anger a lot of
Well,
the time.
and every case that I've ever covered where that was the method of killing, interviewing the police, they always state the first thing we look at is someone with an extremely personal motivation because that's an act of rage. So we don't know how many times he was stabbed. We don't even know what he was stabbed with, but we do know that he was bleeding out. We do know that so he wasn't bludgeoned, right? And Mary didn't wake up. So it seems like he was targeted with a weapon that was designed to kill. And we don't know how many times, but often that also weighs into it when someone does have a personal motivation, when someone is coming from a place of rage, where they will often, again, in domestic disputes, you often see 20, 30, 40 stab wounds on people, and it's like,
Mhm.
it's overkill, right? And I'm
Well,
not
yeah.
saying that's what happened with Austin because we actually don't know, but this does feel like a very up close, personal, targeted killing.
Well, and think about the personal risk too. Like, because if there's somebody out there who simply needs Austin gone, but they're not that passionate about the anger part of it, it's more of just a very cold, calculating chess piece on their board that they need to move, then there are cleaner, easier, and more removed, personally removed ways for them to get rid of him. He could have been shot. They could have cut the brakes on his car or poisoned him. They could have hired someone else to do it in, somewhere where they were not. A lot of times you see these people, a spouse kills a spouse, but they arrange for themselves to be on vacation. So there's no way it could have been them until the police find the hitman and the whole thing falls apart. But this is different than that. This is no, I want to go into this person's house. I want to go into the place where they feel the most safe and the happiest too, right? This is someone at home with his family, his wife, his daughter. Everything's going great for him. I want to go right in there and show him that that happiness doesn't exist as long as I have a say in it, and I'm going to kill them up close and personal. Now,
Right.
that's my conjecture, guys. I'm obviously not a criminologist and I haven't cracked this case, but that's what this screams to me after professionally examining homicide cases for the past, what, 13, 12 years of my career. You don't see this on accident. Like there's patterns here that sort of tie into a certain psychology, a certain attitude on the side of the killer, which is everything you're saying, Miles. So I know I'm kind of repeating you, but I'm just agreeing emphatically with everything you
Yeah.
said.
Well, and look, you could say, and someone might weigh in the comments and say, look, well, maybe it was a thrill killing, but if it was a thrill killing, why not kill Mary? If it was a
Right.
thrill killing and you're that kind of like homicidal maniac, why leave two living humans in that house? If you broke into a house to murder just for the sake of murdering, you're probably not going to do that, right? It just feels extremely targeted. More so than other targeted killings that we've covered. And
Yeah.
it's like I could still look at a case like Liz Barraz's and like listen to an argument where someone's saying, it was like a thrill killing, it was a gang initiation, things like that have been thrown out where it's like, someone jumps out of the car, bam, and they run back in. It's different, right? But going into someone's house, sneaking into their bedroom while they sleep next to their wife, and murdering them in their bed with their child sleeping down the hallway, it feels extremely personal to me.
Yeah, and the thrill killing, I mean, it's like, I guess anything is technically possible, but why Austin? Why that night? Why the bicycle? Why did they hang out for an hour? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure you could make all that make sense if that was actually what happened. You could answer those questions, but it doesn't point in that direction to me from where we're sitting right now. I would be surprised if this was a thrill killing on somebody's part. I think you're right. My gut says somewhere in his life, someone really, really had a problem with him and possibly even thought that their own life would improve if he was gone. More than just, I hate you, I want to hurt you, but to the level of like, if you go away, my life materially improves in some way, either through money or I get this job that I want or something else. It could be a lot of different things.
sure.
Because everyone's life does change in the wake of a murder. Like we talked about, custody can change. Some people get money. There's now a vacancy at work where someone else can fill that job. You don't know what it is. I mean, when someone of Austin's stature, who's important to a lot of people and in a lot of places, is gone, it leaves a lot of holes to be filled. So, in which one of these places did somebody materially benefit the most, and can they be cleared or not?
Right. Right. So what will bring this case to a close? Because I feel like it's only 2 years old, right? Well, we're going on 3 years, but still, that's young in the world of unsolved cases, right? And you have to look at it and say, what could break this, right? And are the police waiting on something? Do the police have stuff and they're just, there's some little piece that they're waiting for, right? Because if there was DNA on the site, it's not like it's a really old case and they're going to go back and now they're going to retest this stuff. I mean, the technology wasn't that different from, 2023 to now, right? So I don't think there's like something was missed in the forensic examination of the evidence, and they're going to have to go back and redo it. And I think this is a very capable police force. Everyone from the family that we've spoken to, they didn't really have anything bad to say about the investigation. We know that this is like a big city. They know how to deal with homicide investigations. So I don't think this is a case of, a misstep in the examination of the evidence, right? So is there more surveillance footage? Has that not come out? Is someone sitting on some tapes? Are there neighbors that, have other footage that could come out? Perhaps, I don't know. Again, a lot of time has passed. It's been a couple of years. That stuff probably re-records, so probably not. I doubt if there's more like digital data out there that could help bring this case to a close. I doubt that there's DNA evidence that hasn't already been found. So the question remains, what are the cops waiting for? Are they sitting on something, or do they just not have it? And the only way this thing is going to get cracked is if someone talks, right? And we always talk about on this show how once more than one person knows about something, it's no longer a secret. So is that person on the bike the only person that knows about what happened that night? Are they completely on their own and they've never talked to anybody? Are they not someone who was hired to do this? You know, the first part, when I first got, when Bob and Rosemary first connected us with his family, and I started reading about it. And I initially read, how the cops described the killer. I was like, post-pubescent. Okay, so they're saying it's a teenager. So is this a hired hit? Did someone like hire some kid
What I
to go
thought
do the
too.
dirty
Yeah.
work, right?
Right.
We talked about that. It was the initial impression. But like again, after watching the video and after studying the case more, I'm not so sure. I'm not even sure the gender of the person on the bike. I'm not sure what's going on there. So like, look, it's possible that that person is the only one who knows. It's possible. It's very rare, but it's possible, right? So I guess what I'm getting at is for me, it feels like the cops are either closing in on this, and that's why they're keeping everything so tight, and I hope so, or they really don't have the info, and the only way this thing's going to get solved is if someone comes forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what immediately leaps to mind listening to you right now is that I do believe they probably have more than they've let on. I mean, just the fact that they waited 2 years to release the surveillance footage that we do see of the person on the bike makes me wonder, okay, these guys are pretty good at keeping things close to their chest. If they had 2 years worth of patience just to show us that, I would imagine that they have more. But a lot of times it's less about waiting to find out who did it and waiting to have enough evidence to prosecute it. I mean, they might know who that is. They might know that it's two people, right? That this person was paid by another person, and they're just waiting to get that connection that will make it bomb-proof in court. We see that a lot. Sometimes it's an open secret who did something, and they just need to be able to convince 12 strangers beyond a reasonable doubt that that's the person. And without really good, solid evidence, a defense lawyer can tear some of this stuff apart. Like these guys are good and you have to be ready to go to battle for your case. So I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I do think just the tight-lippedness of these investigators makes me think there's more going on behind the scenes than you and I are privy to, which is great. I mean, you don't necessarily want a loose investigation where the entire public knows everything because it gives the suspect something to work with to sort of cover their
Right,
tracks or know how to
right,
pivot away from ever being caught. If they don't know what the cops know, well, now this person's living in fear and possibly going to make a mistake, get caught in a lie, say something that the cops know isn't true, try to hide evidence when the cops already are watching to see if they get rid of that evidence. There's all kinds of ways that people slip up, and that's part of the strategy. So yeah, I think what's it gonna take? Someone coming forward or that person screwing up,
yeah.
in that way.
And it's interesting, what you said about how they waited 2 years and they obviously had that footage and they kind of like, let it out. And it ties in with the strange language that they used around describing the individual, who's on that bike, right? Where they're being, kind of strategic. And I don't necessarily understand it. And if I did, I think I'd be unethical to kind of like talk about it right now, to be honest. But you guys can kind of like theorize on your own and like drop a comment on it. But it does feel like the cops are playing a bit of a chess game. And I do lean towards that they may actually have some idea of who they're after and that they're kind of, trying to push that person into a certain direction, right? And they don't want to screw it up. And they want an airtight prosecution on this. Because again, Austin, by all appearances, was a really good guy who was raising his family, had taken on these kids from his former marriage, had a new wife, new baby, close with his family, really great at his job, just a loved dude, with like really positive energy from everyone we've spoken to. I mean, you'll see we interviewed his brother-in-law, and this guy he's voluntarily running a Facebook page to keep Austin's name alive. I mean, and this is, he didn't even know him that long. I mean, this is Mary's brother. So everyone that we've spoken to has nothing but good things to say about this guy. And I know like that's a cliche and like someone gets killed and they say, "Oh, he was a good guy and he never hurt anybody." And then it comes out that he was actually like a multiple felon. That's not the case here. This is
Right,
this is a
right, right.
this is a clean living guy with, who had taken on responsibilities, and fought to have custody of his daughters. And I think that speaks a lot to someone's character. Maybe it's my own bias as a father, but if someone's actually like saying like, "Hey, I want to be the guy who takes care of these kids. I want to take on that responsibility." That's a big deal in today's day and age for a man to do that.
A
So
lot of
I
guys run
think,
from that. Yeah, I mean it's
yeah,
a really good point to bring up. A lot of guys do run from that and they get the opportunity to get out of it and they do because the courts very often are friendly to the mom and especially if the dad isn't showing interest, case closed, and you see that a
yeah.
lot. I don't think I'm, pulling that out of thin air. But you're right.
No,
This is
no, and
the
and
opposite.
him and Mary had obviously built something really special because she had also been willing to take on these kids.
Which again
Um,
says a lot about Austin. I mean,
yeah,
she was, you do marry somebody's family when you marry them, but the entree to that family was Austin himself, and she cared about him and loved him enough to do all that. So,
right.
yeah, I think that says a lot about not only Austin, but also about Mary and just their relationship in general. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just such a tragedy to think uh what was lost there that night between these two and for all those kids involved and really for everybody that we've spoken
yeah,
to who you guys are going
yeah,
to meet over the next couple weeks.
yeah. So what
Yeah.
do you guys think? This is one of the more baffling cases that we've covered. Look, I think all of our cases, we always say they're baffling and they're head scratchers, and that's kind of the world we're in, right? But this one, for me, there's not that much to lash on to. There just isn't. I mean, we have this video, and I'm sure you guys are going to watch it and you're going to speculate on it. And I'd love to hear the conversation on that because, similar to, Liz Barraz's murder, similar to the Missy Beavers case, where we don't see the murder itself, but we, much like this, we at least have some footage of the killer. That's about all we have to go on. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. And I'd love to hear what your theories are. What do you think happened to Austin? Why would someone have done this to him?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to end on a little bit of hope too, because when I look at this video and I think about Austin's, story in this case in general, I think about the fact that whoever it is on that tape has to make every move perfectly from here on to the end of their life, where the cops just need to get lucky once, right? And that is the purpose of this channel. If you guys see this and you think you recognize that bike, that person, or you lived in that neighborhood and you saw something, whatever the case may be, right? It could be any little piece of information. You never know what it's going to be that could crack this stuff wide open. And so if we crowdsource this kind of thing, like we try to do on this channel, that person's luck diminishes significantly, right? With all of everybody's power put together, especially people who are local on the ground there. And I know we have viewers in Houston, and I know we have people who are very into the work we're doing here in that specific area. Um, yeah, that's the whole thing. That person has to have perfect luck from here on out, and I just don't think anybody's that lucky, you know?
Right, right,
I really
right.
don't.
Look, some people get away with it, right? Some people go to South America and live their life, and then other people, the cops catch them and they extradite them back to the States and they face trial. So, anything is possible, but I think, we're all hoping for justice for Austin and for his family and for his kids, because there's these kids that don't know what happened to their father and they're growing up. And, there's two girls who, at this point are teenagers, and then there's this little boy who's a little bit older than my own son, who has no memory probably of his father really, because he was only a year old when his father was killed. And that's really, really tragic. So I'm really hoping that Austin and his family get some answers. Having said that, guys, if you like what we're doing here, please think about subscribing to the channel. Hit the notifications bell. It really, really helps us with the algorithm. I know a lot of people watch this channel who aren't subscribed. We do check our analytics. I mean, our subscribers have gone up quite a bit, and we're really, really grateful for that. But, if you're watching, just think about it. We're putting up stuff just twice a week, so we're not flooding your stream. And hopefully, if you're watching it, you like what we're doing anyway. So think about subscribing. That's my pitch. We're also an audio podcast, so please remember that everywhere where you get your podcast, you can listen to us. If you're sick of looking at our faces, you go to Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Um, Anything else? What do we have coming up next week, Sean?
Next week, we're going to meet Austin's mom, Celine, and her husband, Harold. And we're going to talk way more in depth about Austin's life and death and the investigation from a really first person perspective with them. The week after that, we're going to meet Austin's brother in law, whose name is Richard. And like Miles said earlier, he's been so involved since day one. His sister is Mary, right? And he was there, came in that morning to help her when this whole thing went down. So that was a really emotional and just gut-wrenching interview. You guys are going to want to stick around for that just because Richard was just so on the ground and it is such a great guy working as an advocate for Austin. So for the next 3 weeks, we are in Austin Kanu world. We're going to do everything we can for that story. And after that, of course, there will be more to come and we will always revisit it too as other things arise. So stay tuned for that. And of course, our comment reaction videos. And that's it, Miles. That's all for now.
Thanks, everybody.